Well, good evening, everybody. Today on Trainers Underground, we're going to talk about how security is everyone's responsibility. The presenters or the hosts discussing tonight will be Robert DeRook from Indiana University, myself, Don Hester from Las Positas College, and Brian Tuttle from CodeRight. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, and thank you.
Well, thank you guys for coming. So I guess I want to start the conversation off because I think one of the things that I've started to notice is that you will find a lot of people focusing in on cybersecurity jobs or a career in cybersecurity. And it got me to thinking that in reality, almost every job that you have in IT is somehow related to security, or security is one of the aspects of all of those jobs. So is there really such a thing as a cybersecurity career, or is it just IT as a whole, that one of the aspects of it is cybersecurity? So I don't know, I wanted to get your guys' opinion on that. For me, when I look at it, if you're working in a construction site, safety is one of your jobs. It's everybody's job that's on the job site. I could be a carpenter, I could be an electrician, I could be an architect, but no matter what job role I'm doing, safety has to be one of my concerns. And so I don't know that there should be a separate necessarily safety thing. Now, there are safety officers, and there's going to be, you know, OSHA, occupational safety folks that maybe come in because their job is specifically that, but they're like the minority. Most of the workers, security is just, or safety is just part of their job in that instance. So I'm wondering if maybe we're looking at security wrong. Maybe it should be part of everybody's job. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I'll start off with saying this. I think, security will be part of everybody's job. However, I think there's going to be different levels of security within everybody's job. There's going to be those that are primarily focused just on like the policy and control mechanism of cybersecurity to ensure that we're doing our due diligence with different aspects of, say, server deployments and making sure that they're falling in line with the policies that we have laid out as part of our governance, risk, and compliancy strategies. And then there's the side of it where, from an everyday standpoint, we as custodians of the data have to do our due diligence to make sure that we're keeping track and we're securing that data as best as we can, in conjunction with all of the rules that are outlined to us, or all of the policies that are outlined to us at a higher level. I think there's a clear separation between the two. It's just the level of how granular you get in the cybersecurity rules, I think, is going to be the split, or the deviation factor between the two.
That's interesting.
Okay. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I can definitely agree with the majority of what Robert's saying, and but I've got a very different perspective, and I'm wondering if I could bring this up. When we talk about cybersecurity, we talk about security in the IT industry as a whole. It usually comes with context, and that context typically has to do with the goals and the requirements and needs of a particular process or a particular reasons that something is being put together. So I've got to ask the question, are we all focused on cybersecurity within the same context? I don't think so, because there's IT or development or software or technology is so vast and so deployed and so wide, or has such a wide breadth, that the level and the type of security that we talk about is very different in very different arenas. So, I would wholeheartedly agree that from a business perspective, everything that Robert said is I'm jumping on board and saying absolutely. But there are so many other factors and so many other contexts that our technology and security interplay that you've got to ask the question, where's the balance? Where's the balance? So, for example, if we were developing a video game, that is used in a sandboxed environment or a virtual machine, that the security is managed within the VM itself or within the sandbox or within that tablet or that unit or that piece of hardware. And we'll give this piece of hardware a name, Apple Computer, right? So we're reliant on, or our expectations are that the hardware is going to protect us from certain types of threats depending on what that hardware is going to be used for. Then okay, we're not going to put so much effort into putting in security in. Well, security historically is a very difficult thing to implement, regardless if it's at the infrastructure level, at the software level, at the architectural level. And it's difficult not only in a technology implementation perspective, but it's difficult in a cost perspective, because each one of these areas that we need to secure requires a higher level of thinking and structure, a lot of overhead. It's going to take away processing power from the machine itself, regardless of the machine, whether we're dealing with triple DES encryption or we're going to deal with 256K or 512 type of SSL encryption or TLS encryption. All of these encryption mechanisms that we can employ are costly in actuality and implementation and in creation of these things, plus they're subtracting from the processing and the capabilities of the machine that it's protecting in the first place. So the point is there's always a need for a balance between security and usability, right? That's always the case. But is it everyone's responsibility to provide security within that infrastructure, within that software? And I think within the business world today, when you're dealing with any type of business or private or personal or health or public information data, I would agree wholeheartedly, but you need to be able to strike that balance. But there are other applications where, there are places within the IT industry or technology industry that I don't necessarily agree that security is it is, I don't want to say that it isn't the main focus, but quite honestly, it isn't, and it not necessarily has to be. We can come up with some examples a little bit later, but is it everybody's job? I think if we delineate between line of business and those other contextual areas, that it's not necessarily quite that encompassing, then perhaps or perhaps not. So I just want to keep an open mind in that area.
I think you got a good point there. And I don't think that security should be like the #1 job responsibility of everybody that's in IT. So I would agree with you on that aspect. I think it should be one of the key areas of responsibility, but for each individual person, if their job is deploying PKI, then obviously security is going to be one of their larger job roles or requirements for them to know. And if they're developing video games, maybe it's going to be less. But I don't think it ever gets to zero is what I'm saying, I guess. So that's where I'm coming from, is that I think that no matter what they're doing with IT, whether it's making light bulbs that are smart light bulbs, well, those things can be used to launch an attack. So the developer or whoever's making the software that runs those light bulbs needs to take security into consideration, because it makes life hell for everybody else trying to fend off attacks from Internet of Things.
Well, that I would agree with that, but historically speaking, the calculator wasn't a secure device. And I've never heard of an attack with a calculator outside of actually using it for calculations. You're
going old school on me.
Well, think about it, right? Now, when it came to breaking into a payphone, and Mitnick there was famous for when Kevin was famous for hacking using or if you take even some of the folks from Apple did this, right? Where they would hack a phone and break into the, make calls out to Rome or wherever they're going through.
Yeah, they made the little blue box, that's what it was, right?
Right, but these were, at the time, these were relatively innocent things. But security, if you take a look at it, if you take a look at what the United States has done in the early early 1960s and late 1950s, where we were helping rebuild China and some European nations after World War II. And when we sold them telephony equipment, when AT&T would sell massive telephony equipment components and product, the United States government would put additional computing equipment in there for eavesdropping. So when we talk about security, we also have to talk about and be considerate of the forces and factors around that security that are requiring and requesting and demanding access to break that security, such as our own government. And in the news within the last year, we have the example of the FBI requesting, or the Department of Justice requesting or trying to force Apple's hand to allow them to break the security. So if you spend all of this time, energy, and money to keep the bad people out, my question then becomes, who really are the bad people? And how much time, energy, and money is it? And that's a difficult question to answer in the enterprise, in the global world, because from our perspective, the bad people are going to be the axis of evil, to quote George Bush, where we've got Syria, North Korea, and so forth. But those countries are monitoring and managing and subverting security for their own purpose and running their own governments. Is that something that I, as a developer, need to consider when I'm implementing? Let's say that we're doing, we stand up a ticket granting server for a PKI instance, and I have my own software package that is PKI compliant, and I'm issuing tickets with my own software, and a government agency or such as China, or put your favorite country in here, says, I want you to do X, Y, Z. Well, is this a security concern, or is this a political concern? Where am I drawing the line? How much money am I going to put into development to make that work? To what end? And so this is why I'm saying we need to think about the broader issue. If you're just specifically focused on, we want to secure the bad people out, or to protect the data, we need to protect data at rest or data in flight. We need to protect the processes that operate on the data. We need to ensure that the DLLs that are inaccessible, and that the function calls are not just signed, but their methods are irrefutably part of the product and not hijacked. Really, okay, with all of that in play, what am I actually going to get done, and at what cost, and who am I protecting against? So I end up with a lot.
I see where you're going with it. I think maybe the way I interpret what you're saying is you're talking about risk management, right? So you have a goal, whatever your software is going to do, or whatever your business needs to get done or accomplished, and then you have threats to you being able to accomplish whatever that mission is, or a threat to you violating compliance issues. And you have to take measures in order to mitigate those risks. And that's what I'm talking about for the security part of it. So I see where you're coming from, because I mean, that seems like, am I wrong, or am I on target? You look like you're looking at the risk management aspect of it.
Yeah, risk and cost. And then really the question is who am I really protecting against? Because
well, yeah, you don't do security just to have blinking lights in your server room. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So if you don't need a particular type of device, even if compliance says that you should have it, it may be non-applicable in your particular situation, given whatever goals are. And you know what? And we even have to do this. This is a tough one to call too. That the cost of control is higher than the cost of the loss. And so you say, okay, well, the cost of the control costs, like for us to have antivirus, and that would be a bad example, but the cost of us having antivirus is $50,000 a year. Well, the single loss expectancy is going to be less than $100 if we actually did get hit by a virus. Okay, so then we're not going to spend $50,000 to protect from a $100 loss. And antivirus wouldn't be that one. But I'm saying, you know what I'm saying? So I agree with you on that one, that security isn't always a go ahead and buy it and let's just put it on, because I think some people, especially if they're not professionals in security, and maybe I'm making a comment that there is actually a separate class of people that are security people, but that are at a different level possibly, that they look at security and say, okay, well, I got to look at the risk is what I'm really looking at, and it doesn't always make sense to put the controls in place.
Well, and I'm taking that, so yes, you've got my point, and the other point is that I'm trying to make is, what is it that we're trying to secure, and from whom or what? You have to clearly define what these goals are. So, you know, if we take what Robert was saying, where if we take an infrastructure, or if we take a server room or an operating system, and we implement the policies and procedures and that go along with the actual hardened secure activities, if I make the hardware FIPS device compliant, or FIPS compliant, or I make the software, you know, ISO blah blah blah, you know, so on and so forth, that's all fine and dandy. But if I'm trying to secure this because it's in the kindergarten room within a daycare, I mean, you know, it's without that context. It's who are we protecting it from? What is it that we're protecting, and to what level and to what degree? And bringing it back to your point, who's responsible, right? Is there really a career path for security individuals? And I would argue, obviously, yes, there is. But it's, again, is it a singular thing? What is that security path? And it's not a singular thing. It's a massive area. You can specialize in becoming a security expert in securing oil rigs out in the Mediterranean, compared to the type of levels and security of technology. And these oil rigs, I'm specifically speaking in the technology instance, right? You just have to know TICO code, and you have to deal with the hardware and the physical location, satellite secure uplink capabilities, failover, fiber optic network connections at ocean level, right? These are all very specific things. And while certain areas of security do persist and they are pervasive throughout all of technology, you've got a highly specialized area in each one of these places. Security in the medical industry, at a doctor's office or at a hospital, or worse than all of those things would be an insurance company, a medical insurance company, because they have all of the medical records, right, for all of the hospitals that they work with. That type of security infrastructure and policy and procedures is going to look very different than the security that's implemented at a local university or a local town school, you know, a school system.
Yeah, so I totally get it. Everybody's view on security is going to be different depending upon what their goals and requirements are, or what their assets are, and what the threats to those assets are. And I guess that sounds more like risk management, but I like risk management.
I think both of you are on track. I mean, you know, we have to look at the different silos and the different levels within each of the silos. So if you look at the specifics of the industry, meaning if, as an example, if you look at academics, what are we trying to secure in the academic world, right? Well, there's really two main facets within the academic world. There's the FERPA-related data based off of students and their student records. And then if the academic institution is really heavily vested in research and development of a whole list of things, and it depends on the academic institution, right? As an example, a lot of the Big 10, Big 12, Big East universities that most of us are familiar with, well, they do a lot of medical research for, you know, trying to find a breakthrough in genetics so that they can find out what causes, like Alzheimer's, for example. Scenarios like that, that's a completely different view of a security silo. So what is it you're trying to secure in that sense? Well, you're trying to secure the process of whatever the research is and the data that's tagged to it. Well, in that aspect, you have two really different views within it. You have those, like Don says, that are looking at it from a risk management standpoint, and then you have a group that are taking the effects of that risk management process, and they're going out to actually implement said security policies so that, you know, that data is in a secured state, or it's transmitted in a secured state, or it's used in a secured state. But we have things that we have to do on a daily basis. Like, you know, you can put policies in place, and we all know that, yeah, policy is great, but, you know, sometimes for whatever reason, we might have to circumvent that policy for a particular task that needs to be completed, and then we have to get right back on task. Well, you know, oopsie, it was 4:58 in the afternoon when we did this, and I totally forgot about it, and I'll reset it back tomorrow. Well, that's an example of it's going back to the person, to the individual, to maintain that integrity to those policies that have been, you know, filtered down to us from those higher up that have a broader range or a higher view of what it is that, from a cybersecurity perspective, what that particular siloed industry needs to do. I mean, that's just the way that I see it. I think there's a clear distinction between the two. I think there's, you know, the level that is there to do risk management and figure out, as, you know, Ryan was saying, you know, how are we securing it and who are we securing it against? And then there's the group of those that have to implement those decisions on a daily basis. And we have to, at any given point in time, each person is ultimately responsible for, you know, making sure that they're doing their due diligence to make sure that they're operating their systems in a secure fashion. And a really good example of this is just look at phishing schemes, for example. Why are phishing schemes so popular? Why do they work so well? Well, it all boils back down that you can have all the policies that you want in place. You can have all of the administrative controls in place. You can even have all the technical controls in place. But if a phishing email or a phishing scheme email makes it through to a user's desk, to their inbox, and they click on that link, all your security is out the window, right? So it always boils down to that individual having to make sure that they understand what these policies are and that they're conforming to those policies. And if there is a problem, that they have a clear way that they can figure out what it is that they need to do. Right? So in the case of a phishing scheme, is there a contact person within the policy office that they could say, look, I got this, what do I do with it? I think it's a phishing scheme, or do I click on this and follow the instructions? So I think those are really the two distinctions from a career path, as an example, that you have those who, you know, do the risk management and create the policies to oversee the security for each of the industries, whichever industry that they're in, and those that have to take those policies and filter them down to the end user to make sure that they're aware of what it is that they actually need to do. I mean, that's just the way that
so let me summarize what I think you said to make sure that I understand it. So in even answering this particular question we have on the screen, and that is that we have the normal IT workers, and yes, security is a part of their job role, but then we do have a separate class of just cybersecurity professionals who are the ones that you were talking about being at the risk management level, being the ones that would be the particular specialists in a particular security implementation of some technology. But then you're still going to have the other folks that are in IT, no matter what their job role is, that they may have to reference either policies or procedures that require some level of security, or just, you know, general security practices.
Exactly.
Did I get that right?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Like, here's a good example, right? So you would have, like, coming up with access controls to data, for example. So you probably have somebody in the policy office within the organization who comes up with the policy on, let's say, role-based access to a particular set of data that is unique to that organization. And in there it says, right, we've classified this data as, let's say, confidential. So who in the organization is supposed to have access to confidential data? Well, there's another list of all of those people who should have access. Great, but that's not the job of the people at that risk management level to implement the access controls, whether they're mandatory or it's a discretionary access control list based off of classifications and labels of the data, to provide access to those users who meet that classification. That's up to the, you know, custodians of the data, whether it be the server admin, a system administrator. But they're the ones who take those policies, and they're the ones who implement those policies, and they're the ones that, on a day-to-day basis, security is part of their job.
I mean,
right?
I'm going Could I jump in just to
Sure.
comment on that? Because I'm with you there, but the people who own the data or who are responsible of the data and responsible for securing the data are not necessarily the ones always dictating the policy as much as they are implementing a policy that's thrust upon them, depending on their particular area. So as an example, Sarbanes-Oxley is going to define the process and policies that you need to have to put into place and implement. In the healthcare industry, you've got HIPAA regulatory statements that guide and enforce and require you to implement policies. Yes, you're going to take those and make them your own, and yes, you need to implement, but you're going to be following by the federal regulatory or state or some third parties policies and procedures for the security of that data in specific industries. So I just wanted to add that in.
Sure, and I can expand on that a little too, Brian, because you're absolutely right. There are instances where, you know, depending on what country we're in and where we're doing business, we have to abide by the local or the federal regulations that are being imposed to us on those data sets. However, I will add that a typical server administrator may not have the necessary skill set to interpret what a federal regulation mandate is.
Exactly, yeah, and I'm in agreement with you there.
Right, and that may be the job of those that sit, let's say, at we'll just call it the risk management level, right? That may be their job as the cybersecurity specialist to look at those federal regulations and then impose what the policy from that regulation needs to be applied right to the set of data below that. And then by doing that, they in turn send it to the server admin, who then can take that and look at that and say, great, I know exactly what I need to do to this data type, or I know what to do to this data classification because, right, the risk management has gone out and interpreted the regulation correctly or as best as they can and said this is what's going to map to this particular requirement, whether it's FERPA or HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever, right? And I think that's the distinction between the two that we're looking at here.
And what's interesting to me is in this conversation, we're really again and again have been focusing on what it is in the U.S. or North America. And one of the problems here in answering the question, I mean, the question is clear to me, right? Or the answer of the question is, do we need to change the way that people think about cybersecurity? And the answer is absolutely, right? First off, because we don't live in 1995 anymore. We don't live in 2000 anymore, right? So we live in a diverse cloud integrated data pervasive environment. There's new technologies today that will actually persist or provide data by a flashing light. I've seen there's a TED talk by a gentleman who's come up with a light bulb or set of lights that flash so fast that he's using that as binary data and was actually presenting information from these light bulbs on the screen. The screen was a high resolution picture of a waterfall or a background, and when he stuck his hand in front of the lights, you saw bits and pieces of the screen go away. How do you secure that? So the way that we think of security, right, and how we are going about this, I think, you know, as we are talking and discussing it, we're all saying very valid things here. But the thinking and the future as we move on is a much different place than where we currently are. And if we're looking at cybersecurity from the perspective of a field of its own, I mean, there's no question that it is, in fact, a field of its own. The real question is can the field keep up with this pace of technology and change and the reality of the threats that are ever growing from anywhere from a state level all the way down to a script kiddie level? And I think that's a much broader and more difficult question to answer. And you know, I want to bring that up to you guys and hear your thoughts on that, because this is the world that we live in today and going forward.
I think my answer is we can't. We can't keep up with what we got now with security, let alone for all those other things that we don't know about that are coming out. I was watching this video on YouTube the other day, and it was really kind of funny because it was telling about all these technologies that we thought we were going to have that we don't have, and then all these technologies that we said weren't ever going to happen that did happen. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like a juxtaposed thing. You know, this is what we predicted for the future, and the future, now that we're in the future from then, it looks very different than what we thought it would be in a lot of different ways, right? So we thought of some things that never materialized, and we never thought of things that did materialize. So predicting what the future is going to be is really kind of interesting, and I think that's a different topic. But looking at security as we go forward into those things, do we integrate it in from the beginning? Like I figured out that I can use light bulbs to send data. Well, that's just like a bigger fiber optic cable, right? It's just a different implementation of the same type of thing. We're sending binary data as light. Okay, no big deal. So how would we protect that? Well, it depends upon what type of implementation we're going to use. If we're using something that does not require confidentiality, then maybe it's not that big of a deal. Because as long as there's darkness, we can send light, right?
Well, think of it in the reverse way. Let's say that I'm walking down the street and I'm window shopping. Let's say I'm in downtown Toronto and I'm looking at the Apple Store or the Microsoft Store or just whatnot, and there's a camera that's looking at me that does facial recognition. Now, the data that they capture, which is an image of me, is that secure? Who owns it? What country governs it? And then what happens to it at that point?
Well, you know what, that's happening right now in retail.
Right.
Retail's doing this. They're watching every move when you walk into a store. They see how long you stand at the end cap, and all that information goes back into, okay, this guy looked at the end cap for 5 minutes but didn't buy anything. Okay, that becomes a piece of data that they need to look at and do that. So those businesses are doing that to us now.
But from the security perspective, though, whose job is it and whose policies are in effect? And really, is it the retail person who's standing at the counter? Is it their job to ensure the security of that information, or do they have any role in that? Is there a role for them at all?
Well, that security is mostly trade secrets, right? So, I mean,
it's a picture of you or a picture of me.
Well, okay, that's like a privacy issue for me. But I mean, because maybe I don't want everybody to know that I always go to the Lego aisle when I go to Target, right? Well, and now everybody knows because I just said it. But so is that a big deal to me? I don't know. Because if they're going to start sending me Legos or give me discounts on them, I might take advantage of it. But I can see from like Target's point of view, okay, we figured out how to sucker this guy into buying some Legos. If we just put him on the end cap like this, he'll buy them. Okay, great. So they figured that out for me. What really becomes bad is when the other stores start to say, hey, we got his data and we can see, you know, this is how they up their sales by, you know, doing these types of things. I mean, that's big data. There's two different.
Data analysis, but let's say that Target captured your image in the Lego aisle and Target gets breached yet again. Now, that data and that data that just got sold is no longer just your social security number or your unique identifier. It's literally a picture of you. And now, you know, it opens you up to a much greater risk, whether you know it or not. But who's responsible? Who's responsible for that public image that was captured? And you know, from the cybersecurity perspective, if more and more data today, and it is true, more and more data today is being stored up in the cloud, and the cloud is these singular islands of targets that are available to be breached. And if you take a hybrid environment where you've got some cloud-based you know, storage of data and some on-premise storage of data, and then perhaps you've got some mobile devices that are also storing data, but these mobile devices are also on third-party networks such as Apple and BlackBerry and Microsoft and so on and so forth. So now your data is not just in your cloud, it's not just in your environment, your physical business, it's also on third-party capable devices. So is it IT's responsibility to secure and track where it's not just security, it's also tracking and knowing where this data is and where it's going and how it's getting there and who has access to it. Is it IT's job to do that? Is it the cybersecurity third-party company? You know, there's a lot of outstanding questions. But the fact that we're even asking all of these questions and having this discussion helps quantify the need. There's an undeniable need that a cybersecurity division and a career path is a real thing. The question is what does that career look like, and how is it going to change over the next couple of years? That's a difficult question, I think, to answer. But the need is absolutely there. You look at IoT, right? The Internet of Things. I have a laser engraver sitting on my desk right now, and it's run by an Arduino. So on the Arduino, it's not secure. Do I need security on it? I don't know. This half a milliwatt late. Well, do I? And it's hard enough just to keep the thing running. But you know, what's the worst of it? And what am I securing against? And you know, so some of these things. So in IoT, like for example, the quick-set lock on your door. Yes, security is needed, and yes, policies, protocols, and processes should be put in place, as well as actual security measures. But you know, again, contextually, I'm pretty happy that my laser engraver isn't secure, and because there's really no threat I'm securing against. But from a career path perspective, I think it's undeniably answered. From my perspective, that is.
Right. You know, I think about the, you know, when you say that about the laser engraver, it reminds me of like that episode of Big Bang Theory where people in China were controlling the lights in their house, and they thought it was the most interesting thing in the world. But the one thing that I think about, and this gets into a responsibility issue too, because you don't protect your laser engraver or something like that, and China gets into it, hacks into it, and then uses that to launch a denial of service attack. It's one of the nodes that they use for a denial of service attack. What responsibility do you have as a good citizen on the internet to make sure that your devices don't become the attack devices used to break down somebody else's servers or services?
Well, that comes back to, and I'm sorry to jump back in, but that comes back to awareness and comprehension and competence. People that are using these devices are not going to be security savvy enough outside of turning it off to know what to do or how to do it. And even those that are told are too busy to do it or choose not to do it because you're not going to tell me what to do. Right. So I don't know. While that's a utopia that is something to work towards, it's not a reality that we live in today.
No, I would say that it becomes the responsibility of the manufacturer to do everything they can do. And of course, I understand that it's not a matter of if they get hacked, it's a matter of when they get hacked. So what do they put in place to mitigate whatever's going to happen? You know, like Philip Morris, not Philip Morris, the wrong one. The light bulb people. They're they have to, all their light bulbs, and the Hue light bulbs, I guess is what it is, they have to do a patch for all their devices so that they're not, so that they can't be hacked, or you know, to protect them from being hacked. So now
it will slow the hackers down until they find something else.
Yeah, I know. And well, that's always a race, right? You know, but to kind of get back to what you said about cybersecurity as a career, I found this website, and it's really cool. I get emails from NIST from time to time, and they have a cybersecurity workforce framework that they have that has all the knowledge, skills, and abilities, starting from all the different types of job roles that there are that are specifically cybersecurity, and then rolls that all up into what should be curriculum for all those things, so you can get those knowledge, skills, and abilities to fill those job roles. So this was a really interesting website that they have here. They have an interactive map and a career pathway, and the career pathway didn't seem to be, well, when I look at the career pathway, it seems to be not loading. Work, is it? Let me check. Nope, it's not going to work. You know why it's not going to work? Let's see, let's switch to this. let's just switch to Internet Explorer and then actually look at it from here. So looking at this website, these paths in cybersecurity, which I thought was really interesting, is you can hover on any one of these, like an incident analyst responder, and it kind of tells you about how many job openings there are, how much salary is, and it kind of shows you, well, if you are in this job role, these are the mid-level job roles that you can roll into, and then if you're in one of these mid-level job roles, these are the more advanced ones. So you can kind of plan your pathway, and apparently if you're a cybersecurity consultant, you can kind of come from anywhere and go from anywhere. So it kind of gives you this information. I thought this was really interesting, but then they also give you like where the average salary is for these things, how many total job openings there are, what are the types of top skills that they're looking for. And I always find it interesting because they always ask for people to be developers and network analysts as well. But they tell you about what level of degrees that they're typically looking for, what certifications that they want, what some of the job roles are, and then what are some of the workforce framework categories that they have. So it's kind of an interesting tool that can be used to find what your path would be. And there's plenty of different, like if you want to be an IT auditor, it's considered entry level, although it's not really entry level. Entry level maybe for cybersecurity, but not for IT or auditing. It takes a while to get up to that level. But again, the same type of information that they're looking for there. What I really did like, though, is this interactive map. And if it loads, why is it not loading it? Oh, there it is. Interactive map that kind of shows you where all the jobs are in cybersecurity. You can switch it to like the metro areas, and you can look at, okay, where are all the jobs in this country? So if you're looking for a cybersecurity job, where you'd want to look, what each state has going for it. As you can see, Wyoming, there's not a whole lot of job openings there, but there's at least 85, right? Then more detailed information down here, total number of job openings in the United States, then total workforce that's currently employed. So this tells you that we're looking to have over 1 million people employed, and we only have 778 employed. What the average is for supply to demand ratio. I mean, there's a lot of really good information.
This looks like a great site. I'd venture to say that this is going to be a growing field. Security is not going to go away. If anything, it's going to become more diverse and more in demand over time.
Oh yeah, and if you look at these things over here, this one down here in the right-hand bottom corner, you can look at the different certifications, and you can look at how many people are actually certified and how many job roles are available. You look at Security Plus, there's almost 200,000 people that are Security Plus certified, but there's 30,000 open jobs for it. But if you look at like CISSP, CISA, CISM, there's like for CISSP, there's only 69,000, almost 70,000 certified CISSPs, but they have 92,000 job openings for that. And I don't know if that's because people don't understand what the different certifications kind of fit into these different roles, like HR folks or whatever. But I find it really interesting that we don't have enough people to meet the demand that we currently have. So hint, hint to anybody that's interested in a job in this. I would say I posted this article on the blog the other day. This is an infographic from ISACA, the Information System Audit and Control Association. And they talk about a bunch of the cybersecurity skills gap. But one of the things is they said by 2019, there's going to be a need for 2 million. There's going to be a shortage of 2 million cybersecurity professionals globally. So this is definitely, like you said, Brian, an up-and-coming growth area. You definitely want to have that on your resume somewhere.
Yeah, now's the time to get in and make your mark and become part of the movement, because in 10 or 15 or 20 years, we're going to have a glut. There will be a lot of people who found this interesting, became in there, and it's just supply and demand, right? Over a period of time, if this is the hot thing or just the hot thing, cybersecurity has been a hot topic for the last 5 years, 6 years, 8 years, and it's just going to keep going that way until there's been that need has been met. And this is one of the needs where how do you meet this? It's constantly changing.
Well, and like you said, we don't know where the future is going to be, and we're preparing for what we currently have, or barely. So we have no idea what's coming down the pipe. I mean, we have some good guesses, you know, and you're going to tell us about some of those later, Brian, right? Some of your good guesses about what the future brings.
Absolutely.
But, anyways, so I mean, I don't want to beat a dead horse to death, but. So any concluding remarks do you have, Robert?
No, I think at this point, those who are getting into IT as a whole as a career path should really look at, really take a really long, hard look at cybersecurity. As you said, there's the job market growth is just, right now, I mean, these are just forecasted numbers, but that's to say that they could be on the extremely low end, right, on the conservative side, and these numbers could actually be larger than what they are. But I would really look at a career path, at least with some basic understanding of cybersecurity. Like you saw, entry-level positions may start off with like the Security Plus certification as an example, and then you can leverage that to other fields within cybersecurity. As we know, there's multiple silos, right? There's those that practice like secure coding, those that practice risk management, those that practice analytics. There's a whole different avenue, I guess you'd say, within cybersecurity as a blanket type of a career path. But certainly look at it.
Perfect. Brian, you have anything, final words?
Yeah, and just lastly, I would mirror what Robert just said and only add in to make yourself stand out in the crowd over a longer period of time from a career perspective. I would take the perspective of not just looking at just the security side of things as a security professional. I think that there's tremendous value in the legal perspective as well. So if you took somebody who has IP law, or not even IP law, but just law of policies, procedures, regulatory law, and mixed that with security or HIPAA regulatory expertise. And I think if you couple those two things together, or those 3 or 4 or 5 things together, you're going to create yourself a unique offering that no other career-minded person is actively seeking, and you'll not just stand out, but you'll be the force to be reckoned with.
There you go.
Yep.